Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra. At the top of the hour, which is 9 a.m. this morning, I hope you've reached to your workstation or your final destination this morning, which is your workplace. If you're at home, well, thank you for being with us, but don't forget that we stream live. Even if you missed a segment or a program, you can always go back and view this morning show at your time of convenience. In case you've just joined, I'm Robert Chirabo. Welcome to Good Morning Uganda Extra, which is an extension of Good Morning Uganda. Now, this show begins at exactly 6:30 every weekday, so make it a date with us so that we spice up, we brighten up your morning every day. That's what we do here, and we do that in a very informative way. It's not all about the jokes and laughters, but you get well equipped with what is happening locally and internationally, and you can fit in any sensible topic of discussion because you'll have the facts right. Now, in this extension of Good Morning Uganda, I usually have guests and we discuss issues of concern. This morning, it's all about the environment. Now, on the 5th of this very month, globally, we celebrated World Environment Day. And the main celebrations were in Kololo at ceremonial grounds, where I had a lot of speeches, a lot of performances and everything regarding the environment. Now, one of the elements globally where there is concern when it comes to conservation, protection of the environment, is the oil and gas sector. There is so much talk about phasing out fossil fuels, how these end up spoiling the environment and all that. And when we look at this year's theme, it was Beat Plastic Pollution and Restore Nature. That was the theme for the global world celebrations of the Environmental Day. Now, very interesting, players in the oil and gas sector in Uganda have chosen tomorrow, that is going to be Wednesday, to have a joint oil and gas World Environment Day celebration. And joining me on set, I have, that is Ronald Agutoku, who happens to be an environment officer, Engineering Petroleum Authority of Uganda. You're most welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chirabo.
And at the extreme end, I have Mwesije Charles Mutabazi, who is the acting environmental specialist at the Uganda National Oil Company. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting us.
I'm delighted to have these people because there's so much. Oil is the thing to talk about. Oil and gas everywhere. We await for our first drop, we are excited, but then environment also kicks in. That as we do this, we must factor in our environment. Now I'll begin with Ronald. This day was celebrated and was done. Now, why do you choose to celebrate it again tomorrow? What makes all these players come together and have a joint World Environmental Day celebration?
Thank you, Mr. Chirabo, and good morning, our viewers. Let me give some context and some background why the oil and gas sector sees it fit to celebrate World Environment Day in a special way. If you, like you've mentioned, the theme is Beat Plastic Waste. Now, as we all know, that plastics are a byproduct of the refining of crude oil, which means plastics are coming from oil and gas. Therefore, it means that the oil and gas is contributing to the production of these plastics. Therefore, the oil and gas should also play a very key responsibility in addressing the problem of plastic waste. That is why we felt it is very important to commemorate a dedicated World Environment Day, focusing on plastic waste in the sector, where we have invited different stakeholders, including the international oil and gas companies. We've invited different ministries, departments and agencies of the government. We've invited district, local government leaderships and non-government organizations that operate in the Albertine Graben, where all the oil and gas operations are happening. Now, let me just give you some statistics on why the aspect of plastic waste is a big concern for the environment. Globally, the world is generating over 400 million tons of plastic. But the downside of that is that almost 50% of that is single-use plastics. In other words, you buy either the product or the plastic, you use it, and it becomes waste. Now, what happens to that is that it means that once you've used it, it becomes waste, and it needs to be managed as a waste. But the problem is that out of that over 200 million tons of plastic, only 10% is collected to be recycled. This means that...
That is globally.
Globally. That means that the rest ends up in the environment. Now, the fact that not every country has a well-structured waste management system where all the plastics that need to be recycled are collected and need to be recycled or reused, it means that all this plastic is ending up in our environment, in the lakes, in our oceans, in the soil, and part of it in the air. Now, currently, there is a global concern of microplastics. These are very small particles of plastics, and now these are finding their way into the food chain. That means we are consuming these plastics, they're ending up in our bodies, and you know what that means. We're having all sorts of health complications because we are ingesting plastics. It's finding our way in our water systems. It's also finding our way in the atmosphere. So we end up breathing these into our lungs, and those are causing very, very many issues. Now, coming back to bring the point back home, why are we organizing a dedicated wild environmental celebration? We need to do this because we need to be part of the solution. Now, since plastics are a byproduct of the refining of crude oil, the oil and gas sector sees it worthwhile to contribute to the solution by creating awareness on plastic waste, but also sensitizing and informing the stakeholders of what the industry is doing to make sure that the plastics that we are generating in the day-to-day operations, we are managing them well, and other sectors or other players can borrow a reef from what we're doing, such that we can sustainably manufacture products, plastics, we can sustainably use plastics, and make sure that when the waste is generated, we are able to sustainably manage it and make sure it does not cause detrimental effect to the environment.
Well, that sounds like shooting at a moving target. But where there is a will, there is a way. Now, I want to bring in Charles here. How best can companies in the oil and gas sector or operators adopt to promoting measures that reduce plastic wastage?
Thank you very much, moderator. As my colleague has already stressed, plastic being a nuisance in general management of waste. Oil and gas companies have thought through this, have undertaken a lot of studies and have waste management plans which are comprehensive in nature to see how they can deal with this waste during the operations in the field and also at the place of work. Critical to note is that in management of waste, it's very critical to first deal with the mind change. Even if you have the best policies, management plans in place, and you have not communicated the need of managing waste better, especially targeting the users, then these plans cannot materialize into tangible outputs. So I think it is very critical to emphasize mindset change, and I will also dwell into the practical aspects that are currently happening. Whenever workers or employees are onboarded, these are things that are emphasized on how to deal with plastics in the workplace, but also in operational sites. My colleague also pointed to single-use plastics. These can be replaced with plastics that you can either use and reuse, but also most importantly, just how some of the companies are dealing with these aspects. For instance, Total Energies, EP Uganda, in the just last year produced 1.7 tons of plastic in both at office and operations in the field. And 99.9% of this waste was shredded on site through a service provider. And usually once this is shredded, it is sent to plastic recycling companies that use it to generate other products. This logically means that you do not need to produce new plastic to replace that which is already out in circulation. So to us, that is very critical. Then the other aspect that we are basically looking at is recycling through partnerships with companies that we are working with to provide different services. Then a system that involves even return of some of these plastics to either suppliers or manufacturers that we deal with, given the amounts that we require to facilitate most of our operations. So once this goes back to the manufacturer, you give them an opportunity to think through whether they need to recycle it, reuse it, or shred it and even generate other products for use. So to me, those are some of the strategies that Total and CNOC are currently employing, and we think this can go a long way in managing plastics sustainably.
Well, we are looking at beating plastics to fight pollution, and one of the interesting things is reusable plastics. These non-reusable, that is the Cavera, that most of us now, when you talk about that of 30 microns, how do we get to know them? But there's advocacy for at least plastics that can be reusable. Those that you don't have to use once and throw away. That is one. And other measures, when you talk about recycling, I don't know how good we are at it, Ronald. How are we, when you talk of recycling, when I move around Kampala, I see young boys picking bottles and all that, but it seems like a drop in the ocean. I just need a comment on you on that.
Well, there's a very well-known concept which is called the 3 R's. That is the reuse, that is the reduce, reuse, and recycle. So recycling is basically one of the 3 R's that are very key in sustainable waste management. Now, recycling basically means is that once you've used the product and it becomes waste, you find other means of either changing its physical or chemical constituents to turn it into another product that can be used to manufacture something else or can be used for another purpose. Now, specifically for plastics, there are a lot of reuse opportunities and also there are a lot of recycle opportunities. But specifically on the recycling, this has been one of the key drivers that is being pushed by the National Environment Management Authority to make sure that all the reusable plastics are collected, all the recyclable plastics are collected, and they are reused. Specifically, I can give an example of the plastic bottles, which is the polyethylene terephthalate, which is the PET. Now, these plastics, once they are collected, they are shredded into very small particles, and they are recycled into very many different products. One of them, they are used to make polyester, which is actually a component that is used in some of the fabrics that we put on, including shirts, including car seats. They can be converted also into other aspects. We've seen cases where plastics are used to make pavers.
Okay.
Yes. So there are a lot of recycling opportunities. And that's one of the areas that we've been advocating for. The government has been advocating for. If all the plastics can be collected and recycled, it means that we are reducing on the amount of plastic which is ending up in the environment. And that's the win-win for everybody in terms of the health and also in terms of the environment, but also the fact that we are reducing on the waste that is ending up into the environment.
Well, very interesting, recycling and reducing the waste. One person once told me, I think he's an advocate of the anti-Kavera campaign, and is saying, well, we may not stop this, but as long as we are guaranteed that what comes out of the factory goes back to the factory, then we can safely have these plastics in place. But as long as we cannot even get 50%, and I love the global statistics when you said only 10% of this is recycled globally. So it's not only a Uganda problem, however, it affects us seriously. There's so much temporary stagnation, clogging, our soils may not give us what they're supposed to give us. Then this brings me back to Charles. Are the oil companies doing enough, in your opinion?
Yes, I would say they are doing enough, but also admit that it's work in progress. There are a lot of evolving scenarios that you may need to adopt. And of course, even when you draw plans, you need to assess their effectiveness on ground. So you may set out to do something, and when you reach on ground, you realize that it is not practical. For instance, if you have the best plans, and then the people who are utilizing these plastics do not appreciate why they should be, plastics, why they should be disposed of well, where exactly they should be put. We are talking about waste segregation. Imagine if you put plastics in the same can with food waste, then even the people who are involved in recycling would find it a bit hard to sort it. So the fact that these two companies have, the fact that these two companies which are currently in operation have identified service providers to shred the plastics on site and pass it on later to the oil and gas companies, rather to pass it on to companies that transform this recycled material into different products. To me, is demonstration enough on the side of the operators about their commitment of managing waste. Of course, we cannot rule out research and collaboration, rather collaboration in research and innovation, because whatever is discovered is put to use to try and improve on the current systems of plastics management.
Well, very interesting. Now, this takes me to something which is how can sensitization, Ronald, help in ensuring that we have proper disposal, proper maintaining of plastics to avoid the diverse effect of this?
Well, that's a very good question. The waste management chain starts from the products, right from the time when the product is manufactured to the point when a consumer purchases it, utilizes it, and then generates the waste. It's very important that we take an approach where we're looking at the entire chain, from the production of a product, from it being consumed, and then to the point when the waste is generated. Now, stakeholder sensitization is very key, such that people are informed when they're making decisions of when they're, from the point when they're procuring. I'll use the example of, there's been adoption of glass bottles as opposed to plastic bottles. So it means once you sensitize a consumer and tell him that nowadays there's glass, water bottled in glass, it gives them the opportunity to make a decision at the point of purchase that instead of going for a plastic bottle, let me go for a glass bottle. Thereby, they are reducing the volume of waste that is being generated at the end of the day. But in a situation whereby, probably because they cannot afford the glass bottle and still have to go with a plastic bottle, they are informed, one, of what are the dangers of if they don't manage that waste well, if they take the product and just throw away the waste indiscriminately into the environment. They are aware of what that action means on both their health and also on the environment. But then also what's very important is that stakeholder engagement and sensitization helps to make people aware of the options which are available, including the reuse option, the recycling option, such that at the end of the day, once we consume these products, we are not just indiscriminately throwing them into the environment. Mr. Chirabo, you'll agree with me that it is not the plastics which are littering the environment. It is us, the humans, who are littering the environment. Therefore, if we have knowledge, if we are sensitized on what are the dangers of indiscriminate or improper plastic waste management, if we are sensitized on what options are there to ensure that the plastic does not end up in the environment, it puts all of us in a very good position to contribute to making sure that we are sustainably using plastic waste.
Well, sustainably using plastic waste and of course plastics don't get where we find them. It's us who do that. So that brings in an element of self-responsibility, but that is backed with awareness. Sometimes when I move in some remote areas, you find someone cooking and what they have on top of the food, covering it with all the temperatures, is plastic, and it's being heated. But this is food they are going to consume. So I don't want to believe those know that danger or they are well sensitized. But I'm still with my two guests. Allow me to go for a short break. When I return, we are still the
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Ocho, mwami musoke. Njose ne kusanga.
Ate chichi.
Munange, anti gwa manyo kunyinyonyola ebintu by'emisolo bino n'embitegeera.
Ate chichi leero.
Mbadde ku dduuka ne mpulira nga abakyala bagamba mbu tulina okwewandiisa mu nkola ya IFRIS.
Tukikolanga.
Kituufu
nnyo.
Mbadde sikimanyi na kino.
Eyo y'enkola egenda okutuyamba okulwaninga bizinesi zaffe mu ngeri ya digital.
Etya.
Oba olina okuwandiisa bizinesi yo mu IFRIS, osobola okumanya omuwendo gw'ebintu by'olina mu bizinesi yo, enfulumya n'ennyingiza mu bizinesi yo. Awo URA esobola okukola omulimu gwayo ogw'emisolo obulungi.
Nedda mwami musoke kye sitegeera. IFRIS eyingira etya mu bizinesi yange?
Kakati enkola eno ya IFRIS eyingiza bizinesi yo mu sisitemu ya URA, kubanga tekyali kya buntu bulamu okugerekera omusolo ogutali mutuufu abateebereza buteebereza.
Ekyo kituufu ddala bannange, ekyo kituufu. Kubanga mazima obadde omusolo gubadde gwapaala bupaazi. Ng'ogenda n'osasula omusolo gw'otomanyiiko omutwe n'amagulu. Kwegamba bambi nga tekiriiyo.
Olaba? Kakati ate n'ekirala. IFRIS eyamba okukuuma ebiwandiiko bya bizinesi yo. Kuba biyinza okubulako, biyinza okukwata omuliro. Naye kati wano IFRIS biba biri digitalized.
Bannange nenkola ntya okwewandiisa?
Kyabu nnyo, waludde dda. Okwewandiisa mu nkola ya IFRIS, genda ku kibanja kya URA, www.ura.go.ug. Awo olondeko e-invoicing. Awo no ogoberere endagiriro. URA, tukulaakulanyize wamu Uganda.
Road traffic crashes is one of the leading causes of death among young people aged 5 and 29 years. In 2022, Uganda registered 21,473 crashes, out of which 4,534 people died and 15,227 seriously injured. 22 people die every 100 crashes, and on average, we lose 12 people daily. Legacy Road Safety Initiative, in partnership with KCCA, Ministry of Works and Transport, Ministry of Health, Uganda Police Force, Red Cross, Rosaku, Boda Boda Industry Uganda, have organized the second Road Safety Marathon for the crash victims to help create awareness, build cohesion among stakeholders, train first responders at black spots, and support a health facility. The marathon will take place on the 23rd of July 2023, starting at 7 a.m. from Nakasero Primary School grounds. Book your kits at 25,000 from Legacy Road Safety Initiative offices located at Old Kampala Chicken House, 2nd floor, room 18, or 8th Street, Safeway, Rightway offices, Total Energies, Ovino Mall, Boda Boda Industry Uganda, or visit www.lrs-initiative.org to register. Call 0752 605 479 or 0776 598 817 or 0414 698 675. Proudly powered by Daxi Driving School and Wava Water. Run to save a limb.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Thank you for being with us, and in case you've just joined, welcome to Good Morning Uganda Extra. Today when we are discussing that is how best we can manage plastic waste to avoid the dangers that come with it, because we know if we are discussing oil and gas sector, definitely plastics are a must. But knowing there are dangers, how best do we protect ourselves so that we do not have these problems? And just to let you know, tomorrow we'll be having the Joint Oil and Gas World Environment Day celebration, and this is going to be at Kabarega Resort in Hoima District. What other place? Of course, the Albertine region there where we are having oil extraction and all the oil where many Ugandans, you're now aware, as we anticipate and keep on waiting for our first oil. So that is the area where we're having all this activity happening, and this is where this day is going to be celebrated. But just also to inform you, World Environment Day was celebrated on the 5th of this very month at core ceremonial grounds. But players in this sector have joined hands and found it very befitting to have these celebrations also had in this particular area where our stakeholders will come up. That is tomorrow, and discuss and deliberate more on how best we can beat plastics from polluting our environment. This year's theme was very clear: beat plastic pollution and restore nature. Now, coming back to you, Ronald, let us look at government's role in ensuring that plastics waste is well managed. What has government done?
Well, government has done a number of interventions to make sure that waste in general is appropriately managed. One is the establishment of a legal and regulatory framework. There is a regulation that is called the National Environment Waste Management Regulation of 2020. It is what it puts in place the instruments that are required for appropriate management of waste, which includes plastic waste. Now, it also puts in place, or it advocates for some of the principles, like the reduce, reuse, and recycle. It puts in place aspects that are required for permitting of entities that are involved in the transportation and the recycling and the disposal of waste. It also puts in place the requirements which have to be complied with by these entities that are involved in the waste management chain. Now, the other thing that government does through its bodies, which include the National Environment Management Authority, is to ensure that all entities which generate waste, including the oil companies, do it in an appropriate way in line with the regulations that we have. The government also undertakes regular inspections and monitoring of these areas that are generating waste, but also the facilities that are involved in the treatment and the disposal of waste. And it also licenses these areas such that they operate in a more sustainable way in line with the regulatory framework we have. But also down at the local government level, the districts are also mandated to make sure that they monitor and inspect the oil and gas operations to ensure that all aspects that are being undertaken in the development of the oil and gas are done sustainably. So they follow up, they monitor, they inspect the operations to make sure that they are compliant with the law. So that is some of the things that the government is doing.
Now, related to that, I want us to look at also conservation and restoration. Because much as we look at how to manage this waste, if we don't factor in conservation and restoration, then that wouldn't be so much. In relation to what you've just said, what are the most effective strategies for restoring the ecosystem and promoting that is biodiversity conservation without prolonging the benefits?
Yes, Mr. Chirabo, you'll appreciate that the oil and gas developments are causing or require land which needs to be cleared for the facilities to be put in place. Now, this comes with some degradation or distortion of the current existing environment. Now, the restoration efforts are geared towards making sure that any damage or any degradation which has been caused by the operations is reversed to as near as possible to as what was there before the operations happened. This is a very key concept in the industry, and it's making sure that the legacy or what is left behind after the oil and gas activities have happened is a good legacy. Therefore, we have to restore the areas that we have disturbed or that the industry has disturbed. And there are a number of strategies that are being developed. The first one, of course, being that we have to set very clear targets and objectives. What do we want to achieve? We want to achieve 100% physical and ecological recovery. In other words, the ecosystem should be able to return to how it was before the activities started. So we make sure we set very clear goals and targets. That's number one. Number two, we translate those targets and objectives into a plan. What do we want to do? What is the method? Who's responsible? So we develop a formidable restoration plan, which covers both the physical but also the ecological restoration. Then number three, we must have a very good baseline of what was there before. Because when you're restoring, you have to benchmark with what was there. Because you're trying to put back the ecosystem to the way it was. So you must know what was there before you caused that disturbance. So we have to, that has to be collected through baseline data collection and a lot of ecological studies focusing on flora and fauna, and also the physical environment, like the soil, etc. But then also the other thing is that we have to make sure that we're involving stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders here? The communities, because you do not want to restore a place, and as soon as you've restored it, the community goes in and disturbs it, or does not give it an opportunity to recover. So you have to involve the stakeholders, you have to inform them of what you're trying to achieve, such that they are part of the process and they own the process. So those are some of the key strategies that we're adopting. But lastly, what's very, very important is you have to undertake monitoring, because you might do something, you might restore, and it's not working. So it is through your monitoring that you are able to identify areas where you may need to do some remedial works. So that's very important, because you don't just come and do restoring and then you walk away. You have to continue monitoring for some time to ensure that the objectives and the targets that you set are being achieved. And if those not are being achieved, you come back and do remedial works to make sure that if something is not going right, you correct it. So those are some of the key strategies that we've adopted to ensure that there's ecological restoration.
Wow, that seems an uphill task. Because I was trying to figure out if maybe a swamp was reclaimed, you know? If maybe like in the oil fields, some of these areas were within the game park. Now, how do you handle such, the fauna, the flora? You know, so I'm trying to have a picture to nearest to what was exactly there and how hard that can be. Most when you talked about remedial, because one thing you may think worked may not be working. It seems to be a long process. A long process, and maybe also expensive as that. But this also brings me now, Charles, to what are some of the challenges to this restoration and how can we address them?
Thank you, moderator. I think it's important for our viewers to appreciate that restoration is not an event. Restoration is a process. And as an entity, as an operator, you have to think through restoration right from the onset of the project design. You should be in position to appreciate how the project design and operations are going to affect the natural environment or the physical environment in which the projects are located. Now, when you're thinking through restoration, one of the biggest challenges of restoration is funding. Remember, we've said restoration is a process. You start thinking through restoration right from the construction stage of the project. You go through implementation, and then restoration when you have closed project operations. Now, that sustained funding right from project initiation through to project closure is quite enormous. So operators have a huge task to reserve funds for such a restoration to happen. One of the other challenges that operators would encounter in restoration is actually, he spoke to community acceptance. The support of the community is very critical. I'll talk to a situation of, say, restoration of ecosystems, and maybe in particular forests. You have communities surrounding these natural establishments from which they obtain their day-to-day livelihood. So the fact that trees have been cut down means that they value it for one reason or the other. Now, if a company went in head-on and restored a degraded site, for instance, and they do not engage the communities and the leaders, the same trees would be cut down. So for communities to appreciate that this is done for the good of the environment is very key, but also most importantly, for operators maybe in association with government to help communities generate alternatives that hinder them from, that would divert them from solely looking at a natural resource as a sole source of survival is very critical. Then the other aspect is in the case of restoring degraded land, the competing interests of land use is very critical. Once it's
opened up,
yes, then people look at it as an opportunity for different uses. So you may be an operator and you have all these good plans of restoring an area, but someone is looking at it as a pastoral grazing area. Someone wants to plant in crops and all those aspects.
Encroachers coming.
Encroachers also come in. So it's very critical to deal with communities so that you understand their needs and see how you can address them to create opportunities for long-term restoration. What is also very critical is to think long-term. What do I want to achieve out of this restoration? And me, I think it's the long-term that dictates and builds momentum for the things that we do now. Because if I know at the end of the day, I'm restoring a degraded piece of land that is going to generate a forest, which I know will also serve as a source of carbon sink to address aspects of carbon emissions, then I look at the long term weighing more than what I'm doing at the moment. But maybe also to slot in a very important aspect. Progressive restoration is very key. If I'm at the construction stage and I've opened up borrow pits to, get more, I'm looking at other sites where you get stone aggregate, and I do not need to first run through a project for 25 years to realize that I need to close out areas where I borrowed materials and yet construction has ended long time ago. So progressive restoration also helps to address the aspects of funding, because if you're spending monies in bits, then it means that you afford it in the long run. Yes. Instead of waiting for areas that are degraded to degenerate into even worse hazards for communities and project workers, you think through progressive restoration to ensure that you solve problems, challenges of restoration along the way.
Well, so much we are learning here on how best to handle plastics, on how best to restore our environment. Areas have been degraded or have been impacted by a number of developments under the oil and gas sector. How do we do that? Well, just remind you that the day is tomorrow. That is at Kabalega Resort in Hoima, where we'll be having a joint oil and gas environment day celebrations, where my guest this morning will be there among other people in this sector. Now I want us to wind up with that, beginning with Ronald, as I have your final remarks on this. Tell us also a bit of tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow is a very important day for the oil and gas sector because we want to showcase, we want to create awareness, and want to demonstrate what the sector is doing towards ensuring that we mitigate the menace that plastic is causing, knowing very well that plastic is a byproduct of the refining of crude oil. Therefore, this is an appeal to everyone who was invited. Please make time out of your busy schedules to come and participate in this event, because there's going to be a lot of activities, including tree planting. There's going to be a lot of knowledge sharing on what the industry is doing. Therefore, please come and be part of the celebrations, and you'll definitely go away much richer in knowledge and in experience on plastic waste. Yeah.
Charles, as I have your concluding remarks this morning.
Thank you very much. I think what is very critical is for us not to be overshadowed by the big funding that is needed for restoration. Actually, the mindset change begins with us. If it's a workplace like this or where we work, I see no reason as to why management should not put water dispensers in different points within a building, and also encourage employees to carry water cans where they can keep refilling water. Imagine how many bottles you would have saved entering into your environment, and of course the challenges that you need to to manage them. It could even trickle down to our homes. Yeah, we could be here advocating for plastic management, but in our homes it's even worse. So mindset change is what I would basically wind up with. It starts with us.
And I agree with you totally. Most of the times I go to a supermarket, and if you get to the counter, you know how they pack things. These things may fit in one polythene bag, but then they'll go put milk differently, pack bread differently, then pack if you've bought sandals. At the end of the day, as you open your cupboard, you have about 15 buveras. You're like, why couldn't they at least give me 1 or 2? Why do I even have to, if I buy a pen and a notebook, they have a separate packing, a separate, at the end of the day, so much. So we need to have mindset change and understand the danger of plastics. Well, hope all invited guests will be there tomorrow as we celebrate a joint oil and gas sector World Environment Day celebration. See you tomorrow, God willing, for God and my country. Good morning.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala.